Neil and I will go to Hawaii. You just stay home and clean the house. The moment I received the message from Brenda, I was at a loss. I was at the cafe farthest from the boarding gate. Brenda had asked for an iced coffee, so I went all the way with a stroller to buy it. Even if I grabbed the coffee then and headed to the boarding gate, there's no way I could make it in 20 minutes. Inside, I felt overwhelmed by the thought, I'm done for. I never imagined that the trip I was looking forward to could be ruined in such a way. Left behind alone, I decided I couldn't waste any more time and left the airport to go home. I am Diana. I have a husband who is 10 years older than me. His name is Neil. We met when I worked at my previous job. At that time, I couldn't make ends meet with just my day job, so I worked at a pub at night. Neil was a regular at the pub. As we saw each other often at the shop, Neil developed feelings for me. Every time he came to the pub, Neil expressed his feelings enthusiastically. Moved by Neil's sincerity, I eventually accepted his proposal, and we decided to get married. When our new life started, Neil asked if I wanted to continue working. He thought that if we were going to raise children, he would prefer that I quit my job and stay at home. I had a desire to keep working, and ultimately, I decided to quit only my night job at the pub. Neil worked for a multinational company and often went on business trips, both abroad and domestically. Even though we had limited time together at home, Neil always supported me as much as he could and showed his love for me through his words and actions. However, our lives changed dramatically when our twins were born. Every day I was overwhelmed by work, housework, and childcare, becoming mentally and physically exhausted. Perhaps because of that, I felt that my relationship with Neil was gradually changing. Feeling a bit cramped in apartment life and wanting a space where I could cherish time with Neil, I discussed moving to a detached house. Neil seemed reluctant about the move. However, the move turned out to be a fresh start for us as a couple, and I felt like we had regained the warm relationship we once had. Even after the move, there were furniture installations and shopping for necessities, and it took more than 2 weeks to completely finish unpacking. Just then, as if timed, Neil's parents came to our house without any prior notice. I had been a bit troubled by my relationship with Neil's parents even before we got married. My mother-in-law, Brenda, often interrupts others and only says what she wants to say. On the other hand, my father-in-law, Billy, seems to have no will of his own and always does what Brenda says. Such in-laws went around looking at every room in the house without any restraint. What a lovely house. It's spacious and relaxing. After seeing every room, the two of them seemed satisfied and left immediately. Although I was a bit puzzled by the sudden visit and quick departure of my in-laws, I didn't particularly mind it. The next weekend, they came to our house again, this time with luggage, as if they were going on a trip for several weeks. Then, Brenda suddenly said something completely unexpected. "From today, we will also be staying here." "What's going on?" "I haven't heard anything about this. We're going to live here together." It was far too sudden and presumptuous. Then, as if it were their own room, they cleared out all the stuff in the children's room, put their things there, and completely took over it. I had thought that Neil would certainly address his parents' behavior. When Neil came home, I tried to tell him what happened, but he just had a brief talk with his parents and didn't take the kind of action I was hoping for. Furthermore, Neil suddenly moved his belongings to the room next to the living room and said he would be sleeping there from then on. I wanted Neil to tell his parents to leave. Since living together, it was a mystery how his parents spent their days. They did not help with childcare or housework, and the room was messier with them around. Life in the apartment would have been better than this. Neil always made excuses and wouldn't listen to me at all. Even when Neil seemed in a good mood, I asked him to tell Brenda and the others to leave, but he just lectured me, saying, "Isn't it helpful having mom and dad around to help with the housework and childcare?" For Neil, who often travels on business, having his parents at home seems to be a blessing. I was hurt that Neil ignored my feelings, But he must have talked about this the day his parents suddenly showed up. Day by day, their attitude changed, and now they even interfere with my housework. Their tyranny didn't stop there. Taking advantage of living on their pensions, they behaved very arrogantly. When quiet Billy, riding on nagging Brenda's coattails, asked for an allowance, I was utterly speechless. It was when Neil came home in an unusually good mood. "I'm going to be honored at work next time." Isn't that great? My achievements have been recognized. I guess I really am a capable man. With the added burden of dealing with his parents on top of housework and childcare, I couldn't genuinely rejoice at my husband's splendid news. But as I heard more, my spirits quickly lifted. The award ceremony is in Hawaii. The whole family's invited, and the company's paying for the flights. It had been since our honeymoon that we last went to Hawaii. It had been a long time since we traveled, and it might be the first time since we had kids. I was excited about the family trip, but that feeling was quickly dampened. It's wonderful that Neil is being recognized, especially in Hawaii. All my effort paid off. You are invited too, Mom, Dad. If you pay your travel expenses, you can come along. Really? It's such a rare opportunity, it would be nice to go together. You're going too, right, Diana? I sensed an ulterior motive in Brenda's tone. Since the family was invited, there was no reason for us not to go. I wished Neil would have politely rejected them from coming, but since he mentioned it, I had no choice but to endure. It will certainly be nice for us to go together. I want to see Neil being honored too. How much will the additional cost be? Diana, you get to go for free thanks to Neil. Maybe you should show your gratitude to your mother-in-law and pay for her travel expenses instead. Brenda said something quite nonsensical. Why should I have to pay for your travel expenses? After all, Neil was born because of me, wasn't he? I thought it was cheeky for her to say that when we take care of the family's daily expenses, but Neil seemed to agree with her. I was far from convinced, but I thought arguing further would only make things worse, so I reluctantly agreed to cover her travel expenses. We were to stay in Hawaii for a week. Apart from the day of Neil's award ceremony, it seemed we could do as we pleased. Despite Brenda's trickery, I was eagerly looking forward to the trip to Hawaii. On the long-awaited day, when we were heading to the airport, I struggled to keep up with my in-laws' pace, and was left behind several times. It was challenging to match their speed while pushing the twin stroller. I thought they were light-footed because they were happy about going to Hawaii. We had left home with plenty of time, so there was quite some time until departure. Exhausted from rushing, I sat down on a chair to rest. Then Brenda sat next to me and started talking. It looks like we still have some time before departure. Don't you feel like having an iced coffee? Now. Can't we just order it on the plane? I want it now. Diana, could you go buy it? While it was troublesome, I thought I had to obey, or she might take it out on me in Hawaii. I didn't want to be swayed by Brenda's mood even in Hawaii, so reluctantly I got up to buy the iced coffee. Brenda held all the plane tickets, and only she knew the boarding time. Feeling anxious, I checked the boarding time and saw we had more than an hour left. The departure board also showed the time for the flight to Hawaii, which cleared some of my doubts about Brenda's claim. The cafe Brenda had chosen was the furthest from the boarding gate. Many people were waiting in line to buy coffee in front of the cafe. Although we had more than an hour to spare, check-in time was approaching, and I was anxious to get back quickly. Just a little before it was my turn, I received a call from Brenda. The store is busy, and it's almost my turn. Will we make it to check in? I see. We can get it on the plane, so don't buy the iced coffee after all. What? You don't want the iced coffee? There's no need anymore because it's departure time. Neil and I are heading to Hawaii. You just stay home and clean the house. With that, the call ended. When I checked the time on the departure board, I saw a flight to Hawaii about to leave. The time I had been given was actually for a later flight. Unable to give up, I skipped ordering and ran towards the boarding gate. However, as I had to push the stroller, there was no way I could make it in 20 minutes. Inside, I felt overwhelmed by the thought, I'm done for. By the time I arrived, the boarding gate had already closed, and the plane was about to depart. Standing there, watching the plane, I felt a complex mix of emotions about the inexplicable situation. The fact that Brenda did not consider my twins, her own grandchildren, as family only deepened my sadness. Brenda had craftily placed our luggage, including the children's, in the stroller. I realized that Brenda never intended to go to Hawaii with us in the first place. Left behind alone, I decided I couldn't waste any more time and left the airport to go home. Let's do this. I encouraged myself and left the airport with the twins. I meticulously cleaned the house as Brenda had instructed. I disposed of all the new furniture and appliances in the house and my parents-in-law's belongings in the room. A week later, I received a call from Brenda, who had returned from her trip. "Diana, what's going on?" "Everything in the house is gone. Didn't you tell me to do so, Brenda?" I could hear Brenda's frantic tone coming from the other end of the phone. Anyone would be surprised if there was nothing left inside their home. I didn't say that. I would never ask you to do anything like that. Don't you remember? When you were going to Hawaii, you told me to clean the house. Brenda seemed to be retracing her memories at the airport. Perhaps the Hawaii trip was so enjoyable that the incident at the airport had completely become a thing of the past. You asked me to make the house clean, so I did. They sold for a good price. Thankfully, I used the money to help with the mortgage payments. For this, I am grateful. All the large household items like furniture and appliances had been disposed of in the past week. The house Brenda came back to was truly empty, just like before the move. Unable to accept reality, Brenda said in a voice close to tears. "Come home right away." When I arrived at the house, there was Brenda, sitting at the entrance, looking dejected. As I approached, Brenda raised her hand as if to hit me in anger. However, she quickly lowered her hand. It was because she saw my brother with me. My brother, who has experience competing in national boxing tournaments and is quite muscular, was with me, so Brenda couldn't do anything. "Where are you living now, Diana? Not in this house, right?" "I'm living at my parents' house with the twins." "Is there a problem?" Brenda just looked bewildered. I found it a bit odd to be asked such an obvious question, but it was an important question to them. Since they had given up their previous apartment, they had nowhere else to live but in this house. Suddenly, having lost a place to live, Brenda seemed unable to think of anything. But as if she had just remembered something, Brenda glared at me and opened her mouth. "Even if you can live at your parents' house, you can't sell this house, Diana." "Why is that?" All the furniture in the house had been disposed of. With nothing left in the house, Brenda continued without any hesitation. However, she was unaware that her simplistic thinking would soon be shattered. "If you sell this house, where will Neil live? Do you think it's okay to do whatever you want with the house Neil bought? And you're not even apologizing." "The house Neil bought? Didn't you hear? I bought this house with my money." "I don't understand what you're saying." Brenda, who had been talking confidently until then, suddenly lost her momentum and fell silent as if she had run out of words. It seems she was under the misconception that Neil had bought the house we were living in. In fact, this house was not purchased by Neil, but was entirely owned by me. I had paid for the down payment and the mortgage entirely with my money. Especially since the children were still young and living expenses were not too high, I managed to make ends meet. Since my in-laws moved into this house, living expenses and costs increased, and without any contribution from their pensions to the household, it gradually became a financial burden. Neil is the breadwinner of the house, isn't he? He must have been supporting the household. I don't know what kind of breadwinner you're imagining, but this house is in my name. Also, I managed all the living expenses with my salary alone. Neil didn't pay for anything. We both had jobs, so we kept our finances separate. I managed well, so I never had to take money from Neil. I don't even know how much Neil's salary was. It was just Brenda's unfounded assumption. Neil is the father of your children. Right. Just because he's their father, does that mean he has to own the house or cover living expenses? I hadn't come to see her reluctantly just to have this conversation. There was something important that had not yet been communicated. Would my in-laws, who were only worried about their own living situation, be able to accept what I was about to say? Brenda, please listen carefully. I intend to let go of this house. What? Does Neil know about this? Know about it? It was Neil who suggested it. Brenda seemed completely unable to keep up with the conversation. Even I couldn't understand immediately when Neil explained it to me. It seems Neil didn't plan to live in this house. Maybe he won't be coming back here for a while. Explain properly. I only heard about it yesterday, but he's going to live in Hawaii with his new girlfriend. I thought he had told you too. They looked at each other in surprise, suddenly remembering the trip to Hawaii. There was a woman Neil had been unusually friendly with during the trip. At first, I thought she was just a close friend, and I didn't suspect anything, but it turned out they were more intimately involved than that. Seeing the two of them, uninformed by Neil, was pitiful, and I felt a desire to help them. I couldn't abandon them who were unable to ask for help and just stood there in shock. My brother works in housing support. Until you find a place to live, why don't you both rely on him if needed? Shut up. I won't be looked after by your family. I wanted to help them in some way, but my intentions did not reach them, and it seemed to have the opposite effect. After that, they silently dragged their large luggage and started walking away somewhere. 2 weeks passed, and I finally managed to get in touch with Neil, who was living in Hawaii. We calmly discussed and finalized the details for our divorce. Neither Neil nor I said it aloud, but somewhere in our hearts, we felt that divorce was inevitable. If there was mutual agreement for the divorce, it was possible to proceed with the divorce proceedings, even though Neil had moved to Hawaii. A month later, the divorce was officially finalized. About 10 days after I said goodbye to Brenda and Billy in front of the house, my brother, who knows someone at the municipal office, told me that they had come to ask for help. It seems they had been living in a hotel relying on their small pension, but with overlapping stay costs and daily expenses, their spending escalated quickly, and apparently, their pension for the month was depleted in just 10 days. Unable to endure their hopeless situation, they eventually went to the municipal office to apply for welfare assistance. However, just completing the paperwork at the municipal office did not immediately solve their problems. To receive welfare assistance, an address is required, but they could not proceed with the procedures without one. Brenda and Billy will likely have to stay in a facility for people in financial hardship for some time. Despite being in need themselves, I heard they continued to behave dismissively towards others, causing friction with those around them. As for me, having finally settled down, I was beginning to regain a peaceful life, looking after my twins at my parents' house. It was regrettable to have to let go of the new house I had just bought. Nevertheless, there was some unexpected good fortune. Many of the furniture and appliances were new and were sold at relatively high prices. In addition, I was able to pay off the mortgage with the money from selling the house. Of course, there were feelings of regret, and I couldn't deny that I felt the loss of what I had was significant. However, as time passed, I realized that selling the house was the best decision for both myself and my family. I continued my day job, so I didn't have to struggle financially. Living at my parents' home also provided significant support, allowing me to balance childcare and work. Though they were my own parents, I felt a bit guilty for imposing on them. At that time, a man proposed a relationship with marriage in mind. He was a major client at my company. Still haunted by thoughts of Neil, I had to be cautious about this new relationship. However, as a business contact, It was relatively easy to gather information about his income and living conditions, which allowed me to take the relationship at my own pace. As I spent more time with him, my children also naturally began to warm up to him, and I could feel his affectionate behavior. It reassured me to see him being loving, not only towards me but also towards my children, reaffirming that we could walk through life together. Above all, the birth of a new baby sister to the twins convinced me that our family would become even more lively and happy. As a new, happy life begins, I plan to continue discussing various things and walking together with him.